So I thought I'd start by, first of all, saying thank you for having me do this and let you know why I decided to do this. I have a number of reasons. The first one is, as we are sitting all here in this lovely room, there's a big congress. The AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, today has a big congress, and they take out the whole entire conference room. There's probably be thousands of people there. A lot of the big, I would say the big players, I call them, the hospitals, the universities, the big fundraising machines, will be there today. And they obviously are very strongly focused on major gift fundraising, as we all know. This room, I think, just based on the bios I read, is probably filled with a lot more of organizations that are closer to ours, the mid to smaller level of our organizations in terms of our revenue base. And in my own experience, what I found is that a lot of these smaller organizations oftentimes will focus on things like events or writing grants to be able to get their funding sources. I think we all could say that everybody's sort of feeling the strain. You have to do more with less. So definitely the need is there. And so I think everybody feels that sort of pressure. Well, how do we do this fundraising thing? Because we don't have, the hundreds of fundraisers that we can deploy. So I think that's number one reason. It's really a strategic one, that we need to do it. We all know the stats, right? In 2013, about 89% of all the donations came from about 25% of the donors, right? And these are individuals, by the way. It's not the corporate, the ones that we sort of always think about kind of going to. It's the individuals are giving most of the money. And in 2013, one of my favorite, and most important stats really is the fact that all of the money, there's about 8.4 billion was given away in 2013. And 10% of the donors, the top donors, account for all of the increase, essentially, in that stat. So if you're not playing in that pool, you're missing out. So I want you to play in that pool with me. So this is a part of the reason I'm here. The second thing is my own personal journey through it. So when I started at Loran as the CEO, which was about 11 years ago, when I was interviewed by the board said, "Don't worry, you don't have to do any fundraising. We have a director of development." Yeah. I was like, oh, that's nice. Because I really like the scholars. I really focus on the scholars. Well, we also had a deficit and some serious challenges, and we needed to diversify our revenue base. So guess what? If you're the CEO, you can't just focus on the expense side of the equation. You got to focus on the revenue side. And in fact, I would argue quite strongly that it's probably the top job you have at an organization, to really focus on that revenue base. And my own personal journey for someone who is sort of just learning on the job is I actually now have come to the place where it's my favorite part of the job. Because it's all about relationship building that really allows us to impact the organization in a pretty significant way. So that's part of the other. And the last reason, and probably the most important reason that I'm standing here today, is because Valley Bennett asked me to. And Valley, who works at Maytree, is one of our longtime volunteers, and she's my friend. And my friend asked me to do this, and I'm going to do this. And that's really the core of what we're here to discuss today, which is relationships and why they matter so much. A major gift campaign really is all about that, is building, sustaining, growing relationships with people. So that's what I'm here to do. Now, so I have my 5 good ideas, because I was told 5 good ideas. I'm going to stretch it a bit, because with each good idea, I thought to give you 4 practical pieces of advice. So I call it the 2020 plan. You get it? Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so idea number 1, it's about people, not grants. I don't know how much time I hear about the case for support. Spend 6 months on your case for support. It's the case for support. It matters a lot. The deck. I would say, sure, you need to know why you're out there, but people and the team is the most important thing. And so spending time building that team is critical. So the first piece of practical advice in that, the CEO. So those of you who are in the room who are executive directors or CEOs, you've got to be the primary part of this team. Because your fundraisers and those fundraisers in the room know this, right? Without your CEO on side, you're basically being asked to do the impossible. When they say, this is your job, I don't like fundraising, I don't want to do fundraising. That's hard, right? Because at a certain point, when it comes to major gifts, you can write the grants, you can do the applications, you can do some of the relationship and corporate, but at some point, when it comes to the major gifts, your big donor is going to want to sit down with the person who gets to set the strategy for the organization. And there, usually, they should be, your CEOs and executive director, the biggest, most like the supporters, obviously, and articulate members of the team in really showing the impact of the work. So without them, it's very hard to do it. So they have to absolutely be on side. And also, of course, they report and build a relationship with the board members. So that's number 2. It really is hard to do without a board that is also really committed to doing this. And it could be like a campaign cabinet, whatever you want to say, but the board has to be on site to be able to support their CEO and support their fundraisers and the whole team to be able to do this. Because here's the thing, people don't actually give to your ideas, because everybody in this room has a good idea. We all are doing really good work for communities across this country. People give to people. I mean, we've heard this before. But really, practically, what that means is, when my board member, Joan, calls her friend Mary and says, Mary, would you see Franca? I'm sitting on this board. We're doing really good work. I think you'd enjoy meeting with Franca. Mary might actually like scholarships and education, but she really likes Joan a lot, right? Because last time she asked Joan to buy a table and to see her executive director at the board she sits on. She said yes. So now it's my turn, right? It's a world of reciprocity and trust. So it is a tit for tat in a very practical way, right? So your donors have got to be able to have the capacity to reciprocate in the same sort of way, are interested in doing, are able to put their connections, because they're so excited about your cause, they're happy to bring their friends to your cause. But they also have to be willing to truly sort of have built, allow you to have the trust that they have in those relationships, right? Because it's about trust, right? Because I know Mary and Joan trust each other. They're not going to send anything to each other they don't know that the other person would actually like, right? They know it. And so and you're basically being handed that trust when I walk in that door, I know that I'm not only representing Lorraine when I walk in that door, I'm representing Joan, and what she stands for. And I take that trust pretty seriously when I walk in the door. So really essential to have your board. If you don't have that kind of a board, some people are very lucky already, you're there, so you already have that piece. I did not have it when I walked in. I had an incredible talent. I had some of them who were spectacular and ready to take it on, but it wasn't a fundraising board. So I had some real people really interested in programming and those kinds of things. So we really had to talk together about transforming this board. And Vali was there since the beginning, so she can tell you that. So we had to find, with grace and respect for the commitment that they had for the organization, move them to roles that were actually much more particular and focused on their skill set, right? So you have to make a little bit of room, and then you have to bring in the rest. Now, how do you bring in, and how do you move your board to being one of these boards? So now in my personal case, I say, find yourself a champion. My champion was the late Purdy Crawford. So some of you in the room might know that name. He was a real sort of champion for education in this country, and one who had these incredible relationships with people. He was sort of stood for governance. So I knew if you could get Purdy Crawford to join your board, we're going to move, right? And luckily he did, and this is a sort of side story on how he did it. But once we got him on board, it was sort of like everything else sort of flowed, right? Because people were like, who's on your board? Well, Purdy Crawford, right? Right? Nobody could say anything about him, but oh my God, that man is wonderful. So then it sort of joined, the team sort of got bigger. So that's the third piece. And lastly, once you have the team in place, once you have recruited those board members and those champions, be sure when you've actually recruited them to give them a job description. Don't be shy. I see sometimes when you recruit, you're just sort of happy, I'm just happy that Purdy is joining us. No, when Purdy and we actually had a chat. Purdy, I'll need you to introduce me around. This is the kind of campaign target we have in mind. So this is the kind of things I need you to do. Does that sound good to you? So he didn't just sign on, just here's my name. So I see a lot of that kind of stuff. The advisory, just the names. And you think, well, that's going to help. For a smaller organization, we can't afford it. Everybody has got to roll up their sleeves and got to work for the cause. So be careful on that. very clear on expectations. And then give them names. Like, so in our case, I meet with our board members sort of quarterly or more, depending on who they are, or sometimes even once a year, depending on who they are. And we kind of come up with our list together. So I've done the research, I've walked in, and I say, so, Joan, I know you know Mary. Would you introduce me to Mary? And she'll say, oh yeah, sure, she'd be great. What about Mike? No, I don't think Mike is going to give to you. He's like overextended, but you know who else would be good for you? So this is the way the conversation goes, right? But it doesn't start with me sort of saying, so, Joan, what are you going to do for us? Who do you think? No. It starts with very really concrete, you bringing ideas, because you've done your research, you know who their circle of friends are, and you're going to talk about those friends. And in those conversations, you're going to agree, basically, on which ones are our perfect match. At least perfect in the sense that they're going to introduce you to them. So now, okay, we're going to move to the second good idea. So that's sort of really the team, right? You have the CEOs on side, you got this board, they have their marching orders, you got your process of figuring it out. Number two, you have to build a very focused prospect list, right? We do not have time or resources. We're too small as organizations to sort of do some generic kind of like everybody, you know, like it would be like in my case for Lorraine, if I took the U of T donor list and sort of like, well, any of these people would be good. Right? They like to give to education. You really focus. So the first thing is you got to figure out how much money you want to raise, right? So what is it that you're trying to raise? What's the goal and for what purpose? Is it $500,000? Is it $1 million? By what time? To do what? So be very clear on having that kind of plan. The second, of course, is once you do that, and many of you in the room will have heard this, there's such a thing as called like a pyramid of prospective donors, right? So if, let's say I have $500,000 that I would need to raise this year, I'm going to kind of divide it up. Usually that means that you're going to get one lead gift of $125,000 to $250,000 you need to raise. You know, you need to raise a couple of 4 at $50K and some at 25 and some at 10 and some at 1, right? So that's your pyramid. And I know that many of you in the room will know it. So once I have that, I kind of get a sense of what kind of person I need to know to be able to get me to those levels, right? So now comes the third. So how do I get those names, right? So it's kind of like the three circles have to collide. There's three things. The first is capacity. They have to be able to give you at the level that you identified in the pyramid. Not everybody has to be a millionaire, right? So you need people at $1,000. You need people at $2,500. You need people at 10. You need, and that's very important because sometimes, like, whenever a big gift is announced in media, you know, $25 million to X, people are like, oh my God, it's an environment. We're in the environment. They'll be great for us, right? Your entire budget might be $2 million. You don't need necessarily the $25 million type of donor, right? There's a bunch of donors, actually, that are never going to get the attention by the big players that you could actually target. Sorry, there's a question. Okay. So the focus is sort of like, it's like actually one of the positions we hold as mid to smaller type organizations. It's our strength, right? Like, you can come in with $2,500 and be really a key part of our funding source, right? We're going to pay attention. We're going to really support you and engage you, right? How exciting, right? So you basically, whereas the big giants, they can't do that, right? Because their scale is different. That $2,500 is probably just going to get a very generic letter saying it's time to renew, right? So this is your strength. So you have your prospect list. So that capacity is one, right? Do they have the capacity to give you the level that you need? Do they have the interest? So if the gift is $25 million in environment, obviously, and you're an education cause, again, you might be able to move people along to sort of your cause, but it's like being strategic, right? You're too small. You have very limited resources. You have to use them super wisely, right? You're not going to be able to make someone all of a sudden change their mind that, you know, it's not about the environment, it's about education. And then the third piece is a connection. So they have the capacity. They obviously have an interest. You've seen that. Now, how to get them? Now, there's the rub, as they say. Because basically, when these three circles come together, that's what I call the sweet spot, right? It's like your target. You know how to get to them. Somebody can introduce you the capacity of the money. Bam. That's your prospect, right? That's who you're going to focus on. So how do we, as I said, how do you identify when you don't actually have a connection? Well, first of all, find out if you do. And so how do we start? It's by talking to people. So major gift fundraising is really flying, and it's really successful when you're spending very little time in the office. because you're just talking to people. You're talking to your board, and they're telling you, and you're like, oh, really? You know Valley? I've been trying to meet with Valley. Would you mind? And then that's what happens. You didn't even know necessarily there was a connection, right? And then I meet with Valley, and Valley tells me, oh, you know what? I'm probably not the right person, but there's this other person who I actually know. And this is how it's going to happen, right? So how do you get to the connectors is by you talking to everybody, your clients. Even sometimes when you're like in the least expected, right? Who are supporting these individuals that you're serving? And of course, in some cases, the clients might not be the right people, but your current donor base would, right? They're already supporting you, so they might actually be. So we're basically talk to as many people around the organization, your staff. You know, one of my favorite story is from our cousin scholarship in the United States, and they had like $100 million endowment. They're a big player, and it was depleting, and they needed to raise a lot more money, and they'd never been raising money because they were just an endowment. And one of their staff members was tutoring a kid, and just as a volunteer. And one day, the parent of the volunteer asking her about her full-time job, and she said, oh, I work for this organization, I do this good work. She's like, oh, that sounds really interesting. That conversation led to about 2, 3, 4, 5 conversations that doubled their endowment, right? So don't dismiss anybody. There's sort of a sense that you have to, everybody knows people and have building relationship, and your staff are great, you know, because they're so committed to your work. Talk to them. They also have connection. So that's sort of the last piece. And if you really don't have it, but you've really identified, you've identified capacity and interest, and you just can't find the connector, go get one. So work 2, 3 steps ahead, right? It's like, okay, I know this person would be great. I just know it the moment they find out. So how am I going to get it? Okay, I can't go directly there, but I know someone. It's sort of like the LinkedIn connection. You know, when you look at it, like you're like 2 people removed from, right? Well, go find who the 2 people removed it from is, get that person excited on your cause, get them to be engaged, and guess what? Then they'll introduce you to that person. Idea number 3. Know what you're asking for and make it super easy for them to say yes. So you have your team, you have your prospects, finally you get the introduction, I'm going in to see Mary, right? So I know I have my meeting set up, I'm so excited, what am I going to do now? Research, 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 research. You need to find out as much as possible before you walk in that door. Let me tell you, you have sometimes 2, 3 minutes, right? And some of you have done it, you know, right? To establish, it's like almost like a blind date. You know, you're going into the blind date and you're like, oh my God, I'm so nervous, right? What are you going to do? Sit and right away just like, and I was born and I'm la 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 and I went to university of, no, right? Like, what are you going to do, right? You have a few moments, right? Like, you're not, and I've seen that sometimes. I've been, as a board member, bringing an executive director to see a prospect, and wow, you know, it was sort of a vomit kind of effect all over the donor, right? Because you just think, I'm just going to tell you everything and you're going to get excited as I am, right? That is not what's going to happen, right? So you're going to research a lot. You're going to find out, do they have kids? Great. Now you know they have 2 little ones, right? Or they're like, sometimes you find the quirkiest little things that people say, right? Oh my God, my grandchildren are the best in the world, right? I have these 3 boys, blah, blah, blah. Well, if I find out they don't have children, for example, I'm not going to say, so do you have children? No. Oh. You know? So this is why the research is important, right? Like politically, like be careful, like what you're walking into. Like in 2 minutes, you could basically derail the whole meeting because you walked on a mine, right? So you want to have a really sort of extensive, talk to people who know them as well. My favorite example of all of this is why it really truly matters. I don't know about you, but you know, have you ever hired people and they come for the job interview and you know, they're just ready to be interviewed, right? They're ready for you to ask them all the questions. And then I sort of say, so why do you want to work here? And they're like, oh, I really want to work in the not-for-profit sector. Oh, that's nice. So generically, right? You just work anywhere. Like you did absolutely no research. Like, why Lorraine? What is it about Lorraine, right? But it's like, I want to work in the not-for-profit sector. Okay, thanks. Goodbye. Do you know? So same thing with your donor. Once a donor actually stopped me and said, I just want to know what you know about me. Right? She just stopped me mid-sentence, right? And so then obviously I went on to tell her how her daughter's an artist and, you know, la la la, and she met Irv in 19 and she's like, oh, okay. He's like, you know, most people come here and they know nothing about us, which surprised me because it's like, how do you walk in? But I think to people just like, I'm just going in there to talk about my cause after all, right? So number 2, have a game plan. So have a really sort of clear idea of what I'm going to talk to you about. So for example, if, is Jane from Samara here? Hi, Jane. So how are you? Can I put you on the spot? Okay, so Jane, you and I haven't really met, but we have some people in common, like Joanne and Allison, who speak really well of you. One thing I might know about you is that you grew up in small town Alberta? Where did you grow up?
On a farm outside Camrose, Alberta.
Did you like it?
Did.
Excellent. So this is a little detail. I need to ask that question before I say to Jane, Jane, you know, I think you'd be really good for you to fund one of our provincial award recipients in small town Alberta. Now, if I didn't ask that question, I'd just assume that. What I don't know about Jane is if she actually enjoyed growing up on that farm, right? Jane could have been like, I couldn't wait to get the heck out of there, right? And so I'd have no interest in supporting some kid from rural Alberta. So this is why it's really important. I have my game plan. I have a sense of where I think I'm going to bring Jane, right? But I'm not going to actually know for sure until I've actually asked her some questions. So that brings us to the third point, which is listen, 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 right? The best meeting is the one I've said very little. Like, you know, I haven't told them about, we started in 1988, 27 years ago, and these people came together. And, you know, that the best meeting is where I've said very little. But I have, like, learned that Jane is from this beautiful little farm, and she really enjoyed it. And she grew up with these many siblings. And then she decided to go to Queen's to study poli-sci. And she really thought that was pretty cool. She really liked Queen's quite a bit. And in fact, so much so that she really then got engaged with public policy. And she decided she's going to do a master's in public policy. Jane, is that what you told me? Yeah. So that's a successful meeting, is when I actually found out more about her than she did about us. It's kind of like, again, that blind date, right? When you've actually, the person has said very little, you talked a lot, and you're like, oh, I really like that guy. Why? Because you basically listened to your stories over and over again, right? And so you think like it's just a fantastic thing, right? Because they got me, right? And so did the donor, right? Really appreciated the fact that you went in to actually listen to who they were. So have a game plan, kind of like raising, you know, if we have people in common, I'm going to bring that in the conversation. If there's some things about our cause that I think you might really want to hear specifically because of your background, I'm going to raise those. I'm also going to have always a game plan in terms of asking you for money. So, which is, you know, like I might have sort of a couple of options available, right? Always something that I'm willing to leave behind, which is not to say that I always do, but just something based on, again, your capacity, where I know you're at, with some options. 1 to 3. Please don't leave those generic, like, bricks of proposals, right? Like, a lot of people will get a lot of these things, right? 2 to 3 pages, explain your cause, explain why it matters, the why, you know, more details can come, and really what they can actually fund, and be very specific with that. So around the listening, the other piece I want to say is we used to have this fantastic older donor named Russell, who was a cranky old bugger. I loved him so much. But he was like sort of really right-wing, kind of macroeconomic. He's a genius, you know, sort of received awards for his investment banking strategies. And here's the thing, you know, most people when I go to pitch, what they're really interested in knowing, you know who I'm talking about. When I usually pitch, they want to hear the stories of the scholars, right? You know, the people that we're actually influencing, the impact that they're having, what they're going on to do in the world, why it matters in that way. He could not have cared less about that. In fact, he actually probably would argue against it. He was a macroeconomic guy, right? He couldn't care less about the 30 that get it. What he cared about was the 4,300 who didn't. Because he really believed that our greatest impact was actually in being out there and getting all these high school students to get out and get busy. And that's really what he liked about our cause. So in the listening exercises, that's where you're trying to also figure out. It's not only the personal connections, but why they'd even want to give to you. And if you spend most of the time listening, they'll tell you very clearly what potentially the links are. But as I said, be prepared to change your mind. So I always have the proposal, but then all of a sudden I'm talking, and we're sort of having this conversation with John before, right? You're talking to someone, you're realizing, oh no, this isn't about 10K. This is a lot more, right? and you know it, right? That proposal is not coming out of my bag, you know? So we're gonna have a second meeting. They'll probably tell you things like that they want to be engaged first. If you listen, others will tell you, I'm really busy, so basically give me a proposal and get out, and I'll give you the money. Because my money, easy. My time, very hard, right? So in the listening, basically, they're kind of walking you through. Okay, idea number 3. Closing the deal. So I think, like, basically, when I sort of see, like, lots of the grant writing and the events and all of that good stuff, it's basically, you know, I kind of feel like sometimes we do everything possible to avoid this very moment. I'm going to do it. Where you have to just look at them in the eyes, spew out some number, and make a commitment, right? And so sometimes it's just like the letter is just easier. Can I just write it in a letter, send it to you? And maybe you could tell me if that's going to be for you or not, right? Because what if they say no? But that very moment is what major gift fundraising is like. Everything that you do is to lead you to that one single little sentence to get you to that moment. So 4 little points about that ask when you're sort of sitting that. The first thing is that you gotta feel comfortable. Because the worst thing is like somebody who's really nervous, right? And they're like, oh, you know, it'd be really good, you know, $80,000, we really need the money, like, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you're sort of going through it, right? And the person's like, oh my God. Whatever emotion you're giving them, they're gonna feel it in their body, right? Because they're like, they were fine. Like, you're not the first person to go asking for money. I can pretty much guarantee you that, right? And, you know, you're not sort of doing that. But the moment you're nervous, they're going to be nervous, and they're going to think that there's a reason to be nervous.
Can you repeat the language you used in that direct face-to-face ask?
Yes, it was like in our case, which would be, I would like you to give $80,000 and support a Lorraine Scholar every year for the next 4 years. And then, by the way, that's number 2, which is specificity. Not like, do you think that you would be able to support our foundation? Would you be interested in giving us money? Yes. What money? You know, they don't know. Like, the thing is that they're just as, like, scared as you, because they have no idea if you're about to ask them for $1 million, and they don't have that capacity, right? They want to help you, but they just need you to ask them at the level that makes them really feel comfortable, that makes them feel like they're going to have a huge impact, right, with the capacity that they have. So specificity, that is based obviously on your research, on your listening in the previous meetings that you've had with them, so that you basically are trying to give them a level that's going to feel like, wow, that's like your top ask, and I could do that, right? That's fabulous. So very specific. By the way, here's the thing about the voluntary sector here, this group actually, much more so than some of the big fundraisers, because they're just raising money alone. Everybody in this room, and I know even the fundraisers, you're asking for volunteers all the time. You're constantly asking people to give you chunks of their time. And you do it, no problem. Like, you're good at it, right? You charm people to do all kinds of stuff for you for free, all the time. So it's basically the same skill set. And in fact, it's actually easier. Right? Because, I mean, people are taking time away from the things they love, from their family, you know? They're giving you, like, they're putting in tons of hours, right? As opposed to a check. Tun, 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 and it's done, right? So just think about that when you're going in, right? Like, it's not, like, you have the skill set. You do actually a lot more of the hard work already in getting them to volunteer. Okay, 3. This perfect moment for me, which is, like, once you've asked them, 80,000, remember? 4 years. You know what I'm going to do right after? Stop talking. Stop talking. Because this is the moment, right? Because they're just like, oh, and there's silence, and you're like, oh, God, did I ask the right amount? How's this going to go, right? And so you're like, well, you know, and you start filling in the silence, because you think it's an awkward silence. You have to stop talking. You did your ask. The only thing now you have to do is sit back, let them think through it, give them a time to sort of catch their breath around it and figure some things out, and then let them tell you what they think about that. And now, this is what's going to happen. This is your moment of adjusting, essentially, right? So the great thing happens, which is like, yeah, I could do that. Yes. All right, so I'm going to get out of there as quickly as possible. I'm not staying. You said yes. So the only thing I need to figure out before I leave, the basics, right? When? So I'm like, oh, that's so great. That's fantastic. So when would be a good time for you to give us this gift, right? Yeah, don't be shy. Like, you have to get these things out, right? So they'll tell you, I usually do my giving, all of my giving in December. So, so that's my follow-up question. Would you like me to send you a letter in November then? And they'll say, yeah, that works perfectly. Excellent. And so that you just have to get the sort of those very basic things. And then as soon as I get to the office, I send my little email that says, hi, thank you so much for the $80,000 commitment for 4 years. As we discussed, I'm going to send you a request in November so for the gift to be received in December, right? Just so that we don't forget. So, and then they'll say, oh, that's so great. And then, so you have it. So that's the yes, right? Woohoo, we got a yes. And then, as I said, leave, stop talking. Number 2, if it's kind of like maybe, they're like, yeah, let me think about that. They didn't say right? So maybe. So kind of figure out, what does that mean exactly, right? Is it a question of time? Do they need more information? So ask them those questions, right? So sort of say, what do you need from me at this point to make the decision? And they usually tell you. Once I had a meeting with a donor. This is when I first got started. This donor was giving $1,000 to the organization. And I definitely knew he had capacity for more. So I went to see him and I asked him if he would do more. And he said, I like you very much. I think what you do is fantastic. But my wife doesn't think so. So that's my marching order, right? So basically it was like, okay. Now, so some people could take that sort of saying, well, I guess it's a no then, right? No, it means I got to go talk to his wife. And so that took some engagement, because she had good reasons why not. Her experience at that point was a bit tainted on a number of things, so we had to bring her along, and it was a longer time period. And she got engaged in a way that was really right for her, got to really see firsthand what we're trying to do. And just last year, they made a commitment of $1.5 million, right? So it took longer, but he told me it was a maybe, right? It wasn't a no. If they say not now, so let's figure this out. Not now. What does that not now mean, right? So sometimes it's because they really are fulfilling some pledges, some major gifts, or that there's something going on in their business that's really causing that. Agree when you're going to go back. So it's okay to sort of say, okay, in 6 months, I'm going to come back to you. In a year, I'm going to come back to you. And they'll say, yeah, sure. And they'll think, by the way, that you're never coming back. Alan actually told me this, right, that he gets a request. Every single month, he gets a request for funding, and almost no one follows up, right? Because they think, well, if he were interested, he'd call us, right? So, yeah, don't do that. Whatever you say, 6 months, a year, I have to, sometimes you chase a prospect, like, they'll say, oh, no, in 6 months. Okay, I'll be back. Eventually, they kind of get it. Oh, wait a minute. Either I tell her to go away, or she keeps coming back in 6 months, So it's okay to just keep coming back, right? The maybe. The no. First of all, the no comes to you. If it's really a no, it's going to come to you within the first 2 seconds of that meeting, let me tell you. Most of the time, they don't even take the meeting, right? Because if they're really not interested, they're not interested, right? Now, going back to the Joan and Mary, it could be that Mary's like, I'm interested because Joan is sending, I kind of have to make sure to listen to it. But then as soon as she hears, it's like, it really is not at all aligned. I don't know what Joan was thinking actually sending you to me, but they'll tell you really early on, like before you even get to the ask, right? But if at the end, it's been unclear and you did the ask and then they say no, ask them why. Have them tell you why. It's important. And then, this is my favorite thing. So, do you know someone who would be interested? Because let me tell you, they feel bad about saying no, right? Like, you're a charity, you've gone there, you've asked for money, they know it must be hard, right? So they're like, oh yeah, I know someone, right? So get that name, right? So at the very least. Okay, last one idea, which in some ways is kind of like my favorite, and it's really the reason I actually, it's part of that, going back to the reasons why I wanted to do this, which is create a community for your donors. One of the most spectacular things, actually, I think that we get to do in our roles is to truly encourage philanthropy in general in the country. And we're all in this together. If we all do this really well, it's amazing, right? Like, they just give more to all of us if we do it well. If we do it poorly instead, we really discourage them. So we kind of have to do it as sort of like a code to each other. Like, let's go out there and do this really well, because it will just sort of grow. And by really engaging donors as partners in the impact, I mean, people just want to feel community. Everybody wants to feel community, that they're like in their way trying to better something, and make it a kinder, a better, a cleaner world, So everybody is just trying. And here you come in their life, especially if they're not, most of the people you're talking to are not necessarily in the charity sector, right? And here you come in their life and provide them with an opportunity to really now contribute in a way that they haven't been able to. It's amazing. So how do we do this? How do we do this together? One, always do what you promise you're going to do. I don't know how many times I will talk to a donor and they are complaining about another charity. They told them that it was going to be in the endowment, and it wasn't in the endowment. They told me they were going to do this, and they didn't do it. Don't do that, because your reputation will be built, the positive. People will sort of saying, oh yeah, have you met with the Lorraine? They're really great. My experience with them is superb, and that sort of feeds itself. But the moment you do one of those, it's really hard, right? Because then the trust is gone. Two, show them that you've done the work. It's not enough to actually do it. You have to let them know that you did it, right? And so a few ways, obviously. Have a plan. Like we do kind of like donor engagement and donor sort of recognition plans, right? That are based on that donor. Some donors, as you know, are anonymous. They don't really like anything, right? Others will be really need some clear recognition. So you've kind of set those terms. And then not only are you recognize them in those ways, but you're going to let them know. Like one of the things we do, for example, is we co-brand our Lorraine Scholars scholarships, right? So there'll be a BMO Lorraine Scholar, et cetera, Lorraine Scholar. And so that BMO Lorraine Scholar every year will write a personal letter to their donor, letting them know about the impact, right, and the journey. And every year they write one. So it's the same person writing to you every year. And those letters, you can just imagine, are so critical. Because a lot of people, they give this money, and they might get the executive director saying, yeah, thank you so much for the impact you're having, but to be able to directly kind of feel it in a very personal kind of way, right? So make sure you tell them that what you promised you would do, you've done. And then, this is sort of going back to creating opportunities of engagement for your donors. Again, there's some donors who basically just want to see me once a year, and they do want to see you, by the way. So it's not just like you got their money and now goodbye. Your major donors should see you at least once a year, like one-on-one, if not more. If you have a new strat plan, you're creating one, you should be going to see them, letting them know, right? Involve them in the story and the narrative of your work. But figure out the engagement, right? So what are they going to do? And some of them, again, are like, please don't embarrass me at your receptions by pointing me out. Don't do any of those things. And as I said, they're not being shy. Just whatever they tell you, just do that. And then engagement. The last thing is, if you do this job really well, basically these are going to be the next generation of door openers, right? So this is how it works. It takes a while to build a really strong sort of major gift program, but if you do it really well, then they become, right? And then when you're meeting with them, as I said, my annual meeting, which is like just to tell you about what we're doing, it's never just about that. It's also about saying, hi, Margaret. So, your scholar did all these wonderful things, and our goals are for this year are this. We're doing this well, but and by the way, Ian, do you think Ian would be interested in our work? And I'm like, yeah, I think Ian would be interested in your work. Would you mind facilitating an introduction? No problem. And then you do it, right? So all the donor meetings are like your future prospect meetings, right? They sort of just feed on each other.